Thank you. All right, we're going to go on to the next presentation. I'd like to introduce the Food Freedom and Cottage Food panel. Our moderator is Mike Nordos, the Retail Food Specialist in the Office of State Cooperative Programs with the US FDA. Welcome, Mike, and take it away.
Thank you, Tricinda. So I've been great all week, and I just got a message that my internet is unstable. So I'm going to plug in as soon as I'm done with the introduction here. Hopefully we don't lose anything. So we're going to talk about cottage food, and we have a food freedom panel discussion here. We have 4 panelists that are going to give you a little bit of an introduction about their jurisdictions and what kind of cottage food or food freedom laws and things, activities that are going on in their jurisdictions. And then after they each give you a little summary, we have some questions that we had prearranged for each of them to help guide a discussion. So our panelists are, we have Julie Kraling from the Iowa Department of Inspections and Appeals, Hunter McClellan Galusha with Nebraska Department of Agriculture, Justin Latham with the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, and Karl Hartman with the Utah Department of Health. So let's start out right away with Julie. Can you give us a little introduction and tell us about what's going on in Iowa?
Sure. So I have a quick little presentation that I think that we're going to throw up on the screen. So this is speed talking on Iowa cottage food. So Iowa does not have a single cottage food law. If you go to the next slide, the cottage food landscape is comprised of several statutory exemptions, as well as some regulated in-home food production. So what that means, on the next slide, we have definitions throughout our statutes and our administrative codes. And they define what a food establishment and a food processing facility are. So both definitions exclude several different things. And in both of the food processing and the food establishment, they both exclude the premises of a residence in which honey is prepared, harvested, prepared, stored, packaged. So this applies to just pure raw honey. When they start adding flavors or other things to it, then it gets into one of the definitions of the processing or the food establishment. So next slide. When we get into the actual definition of what a food establishment is, it excludes several things. So the things that I have up here on the screen are just some examples of the ones that pertain strictly to things that people can do in their home kitchens. So people can sell packaged foods that aren't TCS, that don't require any temperature control. They can sell whole uncut fresh fruits and vegetables. The big one is that they can prepare and sell any non-TCS food that they make in their home kitchen, as long as they're selling it directly to the end consumer for off-site consumption. The food has to be labeled to identify the name and address of the person who prepares it. And then those sales have to take place in the home. So the face-to-face sales in the home. They can't deliver, they can't ship it, they can't do mail order. So that's the stipulation for that. They can also, if they can make it in their home kitchen, unregulated, unlicensed, they can also sell it at a farmer's market. Another one that's fairly new to Iowa is a food stand that's operated by a minor. So anyone under the age of 18 can operate a temporary food stand on private property and sell non-TCS foods directly to the consumers. And then our one thing that we do have that is licensed is a home bakery. So Iowa will license a home kitchen, so a home family kitchen, to prepare baked goods. And those are non-TCS baked goods and TCS baked goods, but they have to meet the definitions that are in our Iowa codes for baked goods and prepared foods, which are our TCS bakery products. So next slide. So I have a comparison kind of side by side of the unlicensed and unregulated home food operations versus the licensed home bakery operations. The biggest difference is with the home food operations, unlicensed, unregulated. It again is preparation and sales of non-TCS foods directly to the end consumer and sales made in person. The home bakery license allows you to make the baked goods, the non-TCS baked goods and the TCS baked goods, sell them directly to the end consumer, as well as sell them to grocery stores, restaurants, other outlets. But you're limited to annual sales of $35,000. The labels on those foods have to be very similar to the retail regulation labeling, and we do inspect those. Prohibited foods that can't be made in a home kitchen are foods made by a specialized process, and then fruit and vegetable juices. And then finally, as far as complaints go, on the next slide, we follow up on all complaints. So if we get a complaint on a licensed home bakery or on an unlicensed food, if it's a foodborne illness outbreak or any kind of complaint, we'll follow up on those. That's it for me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julie. And next we have Hunter with Nebraska. Take it away.
Hi guys, thanks for joining us. I too have a quick presentation just to kind of keep me on track. I'm with the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, and I am originally just the MFRPS coordinator, but I dabble in the cottage food. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just a quick little random fact, something I looked into a little bit. In 2019, we passed the LB 304, which is our cottage food law that did get passed in April of 2019. And between April of 2019 and March of 2020, we had a total of 97 registrations. For us, that seemed really big. We just started out. We didn't shoot to the moon and trying to promote people to register. We didn't do any major outreach at the time. This was all just voluntary registrations. And at this state of emergency in Nebraska, that happened about early March of 2020, and it ended in June of 2021. And I looked at the numbers, and we had 442 registrations. COVID related, I can't tell you that for sure, but it's safe to say that those numbers just shot through the moon when no one had anything to do. Coincidence, who knows, but those are huge numbers. And from June of 2021 to now, we've only had 78 registrations. So that is a huge change in numbers. Next slide, please. So for LB 304 in Nebraska, it is, you can only sell non-TCS foods and non-acidified foods. It is stated in our law that you can't have these temperature controlled for safety or acidified foods or any food that falls under 21 CFR 114. You have to be registered with the Nebraska Department of Agriculture. That is a registration that can be done online. It's free of charge. The only thing that could potentially be of cost is you have to have completed an accredited food safety course. It's about average of 15 to anywhere to 30, and then they get higher the more education you want with an accredited food safety course. We do well, I guess we don't partner with, but our local university came up with their own food safety course that's cottage food specific. That's gotten a ton of positive feedback. It's helped us answer a ton of just questions on what's required, what kind of foods fall under this, just because you can go into the weeds of what is allowed and what isn't. Somewhere on the product, it also has to say that this product was made in a non-regulated kitchen and may contain allergens. A lot of people don't realize if you're cooking in your home and you have a jar of peanut butter anywhere in there, it could contain peanuts. You just never know. So that is a requirement. Other label requirements are the producer's name and their address. We don't require a phone number, email. We do make that suggestion if they want any more information on there, that's perfect. We do allow direct sale to the consumer, which does involve interstate sales, which is kind of scary to some people. And you have to comply with local guidelines regarding public events. Farmers markets and stuff have their own different requirements. And if you have a private well, you must get that tested. Next slide, please. For regulation purposes, the only continuous regulation that we have is our online registration. We do just do the monitoring on that. You're prohibited to violate any adulteration, misbranding, or false advertising. If those are some things that we are seeing, we will go in and regulate and take your product off the shelf, so on. And fun fact is we have 0 reported foodborne illness outbreaks from our cottage food producers. Next slide, please. Just some current fun stuff. Facebook sales, we've noticed a lot of people have gotten smart and use private groups to do their sales, and we can't contact people in private groups. We do distribution out of state. We do allow that. Coolers have been a cause for a concern just because of ice and contact with the product is potentially there. We do allow freeze-dried or air-fried products of certain foods, and warning labels. We didn't realize some other local requirements have warning labels that you can just get into the weeds. And next slide, please. And I just want to say thank you, and we'll get more into it later.
Thank you so much, Hunter. And Justin with Wyoming, you are up next, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Latham. I work for the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, Consumer Health Services Division. Wyoming Food Freedom Law passed, or Act passed in 2015. It's since been amended approximately 3 different times, 2017, 20, and 21. The original intent of the act was to promote agricultural products within the state, sales between the producer and the informed end consumer. Some statistics that I think are pertinent about Wyoming, because it really creates some challenges, is Wyoming's population is about 580,000 people. The state capital is about 65,000, which I know some of you may have that many people in your high school graduating class. We actually have more cows than people in Wyoming. So the point I'm trying to make is the goal of the Food Freedom Act was rural self-sustaining population looking to market their goods in their community. Each version added something a little bit more complex. The 2015 version added non-potentially hazardous foods to be sold from home or farmer's market. Items had to be packaged and individuals could not slice or serve or conduct any sort of food service activities. It did require a separate cash register. 27, they amended that and they added the USDA's 1,000-bird exemption to allow poultry to be sold under the Food Freedom Act of a person's own raising and slaughtering of those poultry. And it also included the location of farmer's market. 2020 defined potentially hazardous and non-potentially hazardous. It also added herd shares. And what herd shares are is it allows individuals to purchase shares in an animal while the animal is live and receive a portion of that animal after slaughter. The challenges or difficulties we have with that is how do you put 200 names on a brand inspection or keep that contact information? It creates extra burdens for the facilities that have to maintain those records. It also in 2020 allowed for the third-party sales of non-potentially hazardous foods. And I'll go into the hazards or issues that creates for us a little bit later. It also defined third-party sales labeling requirements, required a separate shelf located in a licensed establishment. So you can sell this in a grocery store or a restaurant if it's got a gift shop or a separate area up by the register. However, it may not be utilized in any of those plates or products that are being sold by the restaurant. 2021 added the exemption of eggs. Ironically enough, that was already found in the Wyoming Food Safety Rule, Chapter 14. And that's the exemption outlined in 7 CFR 57 and 100 and 200. But it made it seem like something new. So what's not included in the Act? Meat such as beef, pork, or lamb may not be sold or donated. It does not allow for food freedom products to be utilized in dishes made in licensed establishments. And it still requires the food to be made in the home. So if you're trying to set up a food truck and make food in the food truck, it does not allow that. However, I am waiting for someone to ask if they can live in their food truck and call it their residence. So I'm just waiting for that to happen. Where can items be sold? They can only occur in the state. It's got to be at an agreed upon location. And food must still be made in the home, but it can transfer ownership at an agreed upon location. So if you want to meet somebody in a parking lot and give them something you made in the home, that can be done as long as it's not potentially hazardous. Now I'm going to focus on challenges with the Act. So like I mentioned earlier, each amendment added an additional layer of complexity. We were asked to promulgate rules, and that was especially challenging or difficult for us because we don't have any regulatory authority over the Act. So promulgating rules in which you don't have that authority makes it really, really difficult. Wyoming Representative Tyler Lindholm originally introduced the bill in the Wyoming legislature, and according to him, he intentionally left it vague. And that vagueness was to create uncertainty or difficulty interpreting the rule by regulatory authority, but it's also created some uncertainty or difficulty interpreting it by those who are trying to utilize it or trying to follow the Act. So we had to create some tools and resources for regulators and the citizens. And so what we did is we created Q&As to try to provide that guidance as additional questions came in. But what we found this was really a double-edged sword for us, because once we started giving an interpretation and putting that into writing, we were on record. And we actually had a document from 2009 that was utilized, it was found on the internet as our interpretation in 2021, even though that interpretation had long since changed. Individuals trying to interpret the rules don't completely understand it because of how vague it is. And in most cases, they don't follow it correctly. We receive about an average of 8 to 10 inquiries a week on the Food Freedom Act. The media and social media also led to a lot of poor interpretations of the rule or the law. They would only utilize certain portions of it. An example of that was the Herd Shares Act, or portion of it required that a written contract be outlined in the definition section, and that was completely missed. And so we had individuals trying to sell portions of animals that were either slaughtered on the farm or slaughtered under custom exemption. Oftentimes people like to utilize the Act as an excuse to break the rules. I will say people are really creative and are always coming up with new ways or ideas to utilize the law to the maximum extent. And that constantly leads us back to the Attorney General's office and trying to come up with an interpretation or determine whether or not that meets the requirements of the Act. So that Q&A is always a moving or a fluid document because it's constantly living and being challenged. Another issue we had with the poultry portion under 9 CFR is, how can I tell, or better yet, how can I prove that the chicken in a dish was raised and slaughtered by that individual? So we came up with a general rule of thumb. If you're not following the Wyoming Food Freedom Act, then you're required to meet all the standards of the Wyoming Food Safety Rule. And that's really helped us as regulators define what our role is. What are our consequences in violating the Act? And we get this quite frequently. Consequences for individuals, the fines and penalties are listed in the Wyoming Food Safety Rule, because once again, if you're not following the Food Freedom Act, you fall under the Wyoming Food Safety Rule. Of course, they didn't write any penalties or anything associated in the Wyoming Food Freedom Act. So it does fall back on the Wyoming Food Safety Rule. But more importantly is the consequences to the department. So here in the state of Wyoming, we have a Wyoming meat program, and it added increased scrutiny and fear of losing that meat program. FSIS came out and conducted an on-site targeted review of the state's meat program to ensure we're maintaining our equal to status. And if we did not maintain that equal to status for the program, that means 10 state meat plants and 28 custom facilities would need to apply for some sort of federal inspection. Most probably wouldn't survive the length of time that it would take to transition, and many employees would probably lose their jobs. Definitions created another challenge for us, or it made it difficult. For example, meat frosting is listed as a potentially hazardous food. I have a culinary background and I'm still uncertain what meat frosting is, so I'm working on that. Also in our definitions, the Wyoming Food Freedom Act exposed gaps in our Wyoming food safety rules and definitions and establishment and facility. And we also don't define what food service is in our Wyoming food safety rule. So that created challenges. We have challenges with labeling. Labeling, Food Freedom Act products do not have to meet the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004, according to the act, and they're not required to list out ingredients. So this is made food in the home kitchen. Just has to note that it's not regulated or inspected and may contain allergens. So concerns for individuals when they contact my department that we just kind of let them know that they should look into. Just because the state has a law that allows this to take place, it does not remove the liability from making someone sick. Homeowners insurance may not cover running a home business out of your home if you make someone sick or burn down the house. And city zoning may not allow you to run a food business out of your home, and the fire marshal may not allow seating at your home. And we have seen that. So that's a little brief description about the Wyoming Food Freedom Act.
Thank you, Justin. And our final panelist is Karl with Utah Department of Health. Karl.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on food freedom laws in Utah. If you could please advance to slide number 4. Thank you. That's it. Okay, so here in Utah, we have 4 food freedom laws in place. 4 that have been enacted in the last 15 years, and 3 of those 4 were enacted in the last 5 years. You'll notice as I go through these laws that there's been an escalation in these rules on food freedom and a de-emphasis on food safety and food protection over these 15 years. On all, I'm going to touch briefly on the first 2, Consumption Healthy Food Act, and then I will speak for the bulk of my time on the last 2. So cottage food statute, businesses are registered and inspected by the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. This is for packaged foods allowed, and no meats, no interstate commerce, no resale of food. The Department of Agriculture.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think your audio is cutting out, at least for me. Are you able to adjust your audio source?
Yes.
And then we may need to back up a little bit.
Okay. I will change my audio settings.
Do you see the little white up arrow next to the mute button on your Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you able to switch to phone audio? You should be able to do this through that same little white up arrow.
Okay. Sorry, that's not working. It just says can't be completed as dialed.
Okay, and then Karl, are you able to remove any headphones and just use your computer audio, or is that what you were using originally?
I was using my computer audio and still am, but you're not able to hear me, or it's not coming through clearly?
Correct, not coming through clearly on our end.
Okay. Okay. I'll try the phone again.
Okay, and then if that doesn't work, Tricinda and Mike, I'm going to suggest we move on to Q&A and then we can circle back to Karl.
That sounds like a great idea, Karl. You were just kind of breaking back. You were breaking up a little bit there. I know it works great in the tech check, so.
Yeah.
Okay, I just called in. I don't know if you can.
Karl,
Much better, Karl.
Okay.
All right, take it away.
Then. All right. Apologize for the audio problems. I will back up just a touch. So the food freedom laws, I'm just going to go briefly on these first two, cottage food and home consumption, because I don't have time, especially now, to go into detail on all of them. So Cottage Foods Act, businesses are registered and inspected by the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. It's for packaged or special order foods only, no TCS foods allowed and no meats, no interstate commerce, and no resale of food. Utah Department of Agriculture and Food has the ability and option to sign off on business license applications, so they're aware of all those as they come in. The Home Consumption and Homemade Food Act is actually quite similar to Wyoming's 2015 Food Freedom Act, that version of it. Businesses are not registered or inspected by any regulatory agency, though. They can sell packaged foods only. There are some minimal labeling requirements, like allergen awareness, and notice that the food was prepared in a kitchen that was not inspected by a regulatory authority. This is mostly for farmers market vending. There's no resale of these products. Neither the Department of Ag nor the local health departments are able to sign off on business license applications. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go into more detail on the next two, that you may not have heard of these types of food freedom fronts, but we're well aware of them here in Utah. So the Agritourism Food Establishment Act was introduced in 2020 general session that creates this permitting requirements for agritourism food establishments and orders the Department of Health to develop a rule. But in that order, there were considerable regulatory constraints written into it, and I will go into more detail on that in a few minutes. But this bill was extremely well received in committee, House, and Senate, and passed favorably. So what is an agritourism food establishment? Next slide, please. It's a non-commercial kitchen facility where food is handled, stored, or prepared to be offered for sale on a farm in connection with an agricultural tourism activity, which is an educational or recreational activity that takes place on a farm or ranch or other commercial agricultural operation and allows an individual to tour, explore, observe, learn about, participate in, or be entertained by an aspect of agricultural operations. So in Utah, this is anything from people wanting to do hot dogs and hamburgers at a corn maze to $100 a plate farm to fork events at a farm in or near Park City. And in this act, businesses are permitted and inspected annually by local health departments. Food sales are limited to the farm location, cannot be sold off-site, but there are no limits on the type or amount of foods served or sold, including TCS foods. It does require a food handler permit, but no food safety management certification. It must be connected to an event. It's limited to 14 consecutive days per event, but there's a bit of a loophole in there because the act says that the local health department must issue an annual permit. So it's a 1-year permit, but then they have this 14-day consecutive limit. So they could go 14 days, take a day off, go 14 days, take a day off. So there's no real time limit constraint in real practice. So now more about those limitations where we're not allowed to put into rule. Please advance to the next slide. The limitations placed upon us, it says in the Act, when making the rules, the department may not make rules regarding, and look at this list. These are the things we could not write into a rule. Could you imagine if just 5 of these things were taken out of food code, what that would do and to food protection? But all of these things we were severely disadvantaged in terms of protecting public health and not being able to write on any of these things. In addition, another limiting factor is that in 2018, our governor signed an executive order which prevents any state agency from issuing a statement for or against a bill, because some perceive that as lobbying, some of the legislative representatives. So essentially, we cannot speak unless we are first approached by a representative and asked for information. So this bill, when it was introduced, went out with no involvement from the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture, no negotiations allowed, and it passed exactly as introduced with no concessions or changes. As a result, a 16-page rule was enacted in December of 2020, exactly as prescribed in the Act. And then we moved from there to the following year. So please, next slide. With the Microenterprise Home Kitchen Act, which was introduced in the 2021 general session. Our general session kind of follows the start of a typical calendar year, so January, February. It ends the second week of February. But this one created permitting requirements for microenterprise home kitchens, orders the Utah Department of Health again to develop a rule, and again with considerable regulatory constraints written into the bill. We had the same lobbyists as the food AFE bill that introduced the exact same language, but open to every home kitchen in the state. There was a new bill sponsor on this one, first-year legislative representative, and this time because of our positive and professional interactions with lobbyists when writing the agricultural food rule, the Department of Health was looped into the legislative process and allowed to negotiate several modifications to the bill. But what is a microenterprise home kitchen? Please advance to the next slide. A microenterprise home kitchen means a non-commercial kitchen facility located in a private home and operated by a resident of the home where ready-to-eat food is handled, stored, prepared, or offered for sale. So the underlying portion was negotiated. We were able to get those additional restrictions put in. That was a small victory, but we would take anything given what we experienced the year before. Next slide, please. So this was some of the challenges we had in this legislative process. It was misrepresented. The bill was introduced as exactly the same as California, but when we look further, it was very different. For example, California has a local health department opt-out. Utah does not. What that means is that each local health jurisdiction was able to opt out if they didn't want microenterprise home kitchens in their jurisdiction, and guess what? Only Riverside County has opted in even to date. That may be different, but in addition, California's law has annual revenue limits placed upon the microenterprise home kitchen. Utah's does not. California law has a limit on meals served per week. Utah's does not. The Utah bill copied language from California, but truncated it in a way that completely changes the meaning. For example, in Utah, microenterprise home kitchen is exempt from requirements pertaining, or in California, requirements pertaining to water, plumbing, drainage, and waste, as specified in very specific subsections of rule, all pertaining to backflow prevention. But that provision was copied into the Utah rule stating microenterprise home kitchens are exempt from requirements pertaining to water, plumbing, drainage, and waste, period. I mean, imagine how that changes the meaning and what that opens up. We had another problem with some serious confusion about expertise. The environmental health representatives from Utah Department of Health and the local health officers were in a virtual meeting with the bill sponsor. And as we were asking questions about whether certain sections could be amended in favor of public health considerations, she said to us that she would first need to check with, quote, her experts, close quote. She was referring to her lobbyists. the food freedom lobbyists that she was referring to as her experts. So still kind of working on straightening out who the experts really are. And then another challenge was that the bill was extremely well received in committee, in House, and in the Senate, and passed unanimously. A direct quote from the floor of the Senate, quote, "This law will allow people to continue to sell tamales out of their trunk in the parking lot, but within a legal framework," close quote. You can just imagine we were not allowed to speak on that or to correct that misinformation, but our jaws dropped, as I'm sure yours have too. So next slide, and this is my last slide. This was the limitations again placed upon the department for this rule, but the things that are struck out were the things we were able to negotiate by having some, at least a voice or a seat at the table. So we were able to regulate on hand washing facilities, water, plumbing, drainage, waste, the presence of handling, and handling of animals, et cetera. And so that felt like a huge victory. And in addition, other concessions that were made on behalf of public health in Utah for this law were that microenterprise home kitchens are permitted and inspected annually. Almost any food can be served except certain high-risk foods. Food must be prepared and served on the same day. Food must be picked up or delivered, not consumed on the premises, which was allowed originally. And it requires a food handler permit and food safety manager certification. As a result of this act, a 17-page rule will be published for a second public comment period on October 1st, 2021, so just in a few days. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Karl. So we're going to go a little bit into the break at the end of this because we have a lot of questions here, and I see there's a lot of questions in the chat. So I think what we'll do is if the panelists don't mind scrolling through the chat and they can help answer some of the questions when they're not talking, or if they can stay late, that'd be great. And then we'll do the questions we had that came in prior to this here. So can we put up the cottage food summary screen, please? The slide for this next part. So what this slide is, this is to try and save a little bit of time today, because as I'm sure you heard when each presenter went through kind of the summary of what the laws were, what products were allowed, how things can be distributed within their states, and what the different levels of requirements for laws and oversight are. It's kind of all over the map with these things. So what we did is we created a quick slide that you can reference as the speakers talk, so you can see pertinent to each of the panelists in their state, what the laws kind of regulate, what products are allowed and how those products are distributed. So just kind of a synopsis of the snapshot there. So the first question is I'll have Karl, if you could go first, and then Julie answer it after that, is what approaches or strategies have worked to limit these types of legislation? Which ones haven't worked?
As you can see, we have not been very successful at limiting this type of legislation. It seems to be escalating in Utah, but we are at least now being able to speak directly with representatives. And I don't know, I said before, I feel like that was a result of us working with the lobbyists before on that previous law. And it may have had to do with just coronavirus and allowing us to meet virtually, that we were looped into some of these meetings. But I think because we were able to successfully meet with the bill sponsor and the lobbyists in this last legislative session and demonstrated that it can be done and that we can collaborate and make concessions, that we might at least, I certainly hope we can do that again. And maybe we've convinced some of the powers that be here that would be in their best interest as well.
Thanks, Karl. Julie.
So we've worked really hard to build positive relationships in our state. So with industry and other agencies that we have to work with closely. And so when public health issues are at stake, we're really quick to reach out to industry and those other agencies to see what they're thinking, and they reach out to us to see, to get guidance. you know, we don't take sides on the issues, but we want to make sure that we're providing the facts, the regulations, to help people make informed decisions when it comes to legislation. And that's worked for us so far.
All right, thanks, Julie. And the next question that came up, we're going to send it to Justin. And it is, have you had any outbreaks associated with unregulated products? And what are some of the challenges with identifying them?
So at this time, we've had no lab confirmed outbreaks, but we all know how much foodborne illness goes unreported. As I was mentioning, the population of Wyoming also, one of the other challenges that we face is the communities are so small. So when it comes to an outbreak investigation and we go to try to pull samples, people don't want to turn on their neighbors, or they're unwilling to participate all of a sudden because they don't want that community perception. So it's been really difficult to get people to cooperate in some of those smaller communities. We've actually had people throw away product that was intended to be tested that they said they had, but it miraculously ended up in the trash. We had a reported outbreak with some bakery products. It was a Trish Leche cake that was mailed to another state. And we also had some Campylobacter that was in Listeria, believed to be associated with some soft cheese from raw milk. But once again, none of those are lab confirmed because we never got the product samples.
Thank you. And a question for Hunter. Have you had challenges with managing and responding to complaints?
I would say there's been more challenges, especially with the increase in use of social media. A lot of the complaints we do receive are from sales on Facebook, and with people being not registered. There's only so far we can dig without stepping into privacy issues and then putting the department on like a teeter-totter, I guess. So we can't go in with our own personal Facebook accounts and try to join these Facebook groups and reach out to them on a personal level. That's not our authority outside of work. And when you try to join a local or a private Facebook group using the Nebraska Department of Ag's Facebook account, it doesn't exactly get the greatest feedback. So diving deeper into that kind of situation, it does get complicated. And when people do try to sell on Facebook, they don't put their phone numbers out there right away, or email or immediate contact. You can message them through Facebook, which then again, you run into the situation where the Nebraska Department of Agriculture is reaching out to this individual, and they'll block you, you immediately go silent. Those are some issues we run into. Same with out of state sales. We have gotten some phone calls just from other states asking why they're receiving our products, or just products with their addresses on it, that kind of stuff. We don't have a law that says you can't sell interstate, and other states don't like that, but it's hard to say that we can't do anything about it. Other complaints are with sales at farmers markets. The state can only do so much, especially when local authorities involved. There's different requirements at local events, and a lot of those complaints come back on us on, well, you don't require that. And it's like, that's very true, but local authority requires that. And when people sign up and register for the cottage food law, they're not sure why they have to follow local authority. And then you just get into the weeds on that situation. But otherwise, I mean, complaints are pretty straightforward. If we do receive any foodborne illness related situations, we do have the authority to send our inspectors out to investigate. But luckily we haven't had to deal with any of those. they've been more just on wholesale products that they thought were cottage food products. So we've kind of been lucky on that, but otherwise complaints are all social media related, it seems.
Thank you, Hunter. And it looks like a question for Justin. Do you have challenges with third-party sales?
We absolutely do have challenges with third-party sales. One of the challenges is trying to determine whether or not it's potentially hazardous or non-potentially hazardous, because only third-party sales of non-potentially hazardous foods can take place. But we don't have any authority to regulate, test, or sample. We're definitely not going to get a processing letter with any of that product. So whether it's a jar of pickles and water, or I'm sorry, a jar of cucumbers and water, or whether it's pickles, I have no idea because I have no ability to test or check that. We also have challenges with restaurants wanting to sell jams or salsas in the front retail area by the cash register because we're not in them very frequently. How do you determine, or how do you ensure that that product's not ending up back in the kitchen and they're trying to utilize it in the food? You know, I think we really have a luxury of a solid food safety system in the US, and people assume that the products that they get in a grocery store are automatically safe because they're in a licensed facility, and really educating people that buyer beware, there could be unlicensed product in the grocery store has also been a challenge with third-party sales. And we're facing the same issue as other states. Digital platforms make it difficult to track, regulate. Facebook, Pinterest, other locally created websites or co-ops are making it challenging. We see a lot of third-party sales from these co-ops on national apps. That's really getting promoted big. And it's really, we see a lot of backing from the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund backing this movement, and they're really promoting within our state different mechanism for third-party sales, which makes it extremely challenging.
Thank you. We have a couple minutes left, so I can look at the chat here, and it looks like there's some questions came in. They come in as we're speaking, so sometimes it's hard to know who it's for, but I see, so any panelist can answer in the chat. But I have one specific to Utah and Wyoming that's asking if you've had issues with raw milk.
I'll speak for Utah. Yes, there was a Campy outbreak in, I think, 2018 that was pretty bad, and then just little spotty things that have kind of happened here and there. But yeah, so we have had problems.
So is Wyoming. We've had some difficulty, but once again, it's usually difficulty getting the samples and confirming it. But we have had outbreaks associated with families or people traveling through.
Thank you. And another question kind of go together. It asks about if there's no complaint investigations for foodborne illness, and at the same time, I'll say who handles enforcement for those not following the rules in your areas. And that's open to any panelists.
I'll jump in on that first. So complaint investigations, at least for the two most recent laws, Agritourism Food Establishment in Utah and the Microenterprise Home Kitchen, the bill or the rule does allow for complaint investigation inspection. It really kind of limits the number of inspections to an annual, but it does allow for an additional inspection or investigation for foodborne illness outbreak, and allows the local health department to conduct those inspections and charge the facility for reimbursement for the cost of those investigations.
Great, thank you. Well, it actually worked out that we are perfectly at time. There are, I know, a lot more questions in the chat, but we'll never have time to get to them all. And I see that the panelists have been answering them, so I appreciate that. So Tracinda, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, panelists. This was fantastic. As Mike mentioned, we do have a lot more questions in chat, so if the panelists could please take a look and respond, you can hover over the question and actually do a thread as a response. Either way is fine. I know there's just a lot of comments there. So very interesting topic, and really appreciate all of you for sharing your information with your states today. So we will be taking a 5-minute break.